There are seasons when God does not speak loudly, does not move dramatically, and does not answer quickly, yet His presence feels closer than it ever has before. Nothing around you may look different, but something within you is undeniably changing. Your heart feels more aware, more tender, more awake. You're not chasing signs or asking for proof. You're simply sensing Him, quietly, steadily, personally. This is not distance. This is intimacy. When God draws someone closer to His heart, He rarely does it through noise. He does it through invitation, through stillness, through subtle shifts that only the Spirit can recognize. He does not pull you closer by force. He draws you by love. And often, you don't even realize what is happening until you look back and see how deeply you've been changed. You may notice that the things that once satisfied you no longer reach as deeply as they used to, not because they are sinful, but because they are insufficient. Your soul seems to be craving something more honest, more eternal, more real. This longing is not emptiness, it is alignment. God is awakening a desire in you that only He can fulfill. There may also be moments when God feels quiet, yet strangely near. You pray without urgency. You sit without anxiety. You're not demanding answers, you're resting in presence. This is one of the clearest signs of closeness. God does not always reveal His heart through words. Sometimes He reveals it through peace. As He draws you closer, your heart becomes softer, not weaker, but more responsive. You begin to notice what grieves Him and what delights Him. Conviction feels gentler but deeper. You're less interested in appearing righteous and more interested in being real before Him. You no longer hide what He already sees. You bring it to Him because you trust His love. This closeness may also feel lonely at times. Not because God has isolated you to hurt you, but because intimacy often requires separation from noise, from distraction, from voices that pull your attention away from Him. God creates space so He can fill it with Himself. What feels like distance from the world is often closeness to His heart. You may not have asked for this season. You may not have understood it when it began. But God does not draw hearts closer by accident. He does it with intention, patience, and tenderness. He knows exactly what your soul needs, and He knows how to bring you near without overwhelming you. If something in your spirit feels different lately, if your faith feels quieter but deeper, if your prayers feel simpler but more sincere, if your heart feels strangely at rest even when life is unresolved, do not ignore it. These are not random feelings. They are signs of a holy drawing. God is not asking you to strive, He is inviting you to come closer. And when He draws someone near to His heart, it is always because He desires relationship more than performance, intimacy more than appearance, and love more than anything else. Number 1, you feel a growing discomfort with surface-level faith. One of the first signs that God is quietly drawing you closer to His heart is a growing discomfort with faith that stays on the surface. What once felt sufficient now feels incomplete. Routines you once followed without question begin to feel hollow. You're not losing faith, you're outgrowing shallow expressions of it. This discomfort does not come from rebellion, it comes from hunger. God awakens a deeper desire within you because He wants more than your habits, He wants your heart. You may still attend, still serve, still believe, but something inside you longs for authenticity over routine, intimacy over structure, depth over appearance. You begin to notice when faith becomes performance instead of relationship. Words spoken without meaning no longer satisfy you. Practices done out of obligation begin to feel heavy. This is not condemnation, it is invitation. God is gently showing you that He wants to meet you beyond the surface, where faith is honest and unfiltered. As this discomfort grows, you may feel unsettled in environments that once felt comfortable. Conversations about God that lack sincerity may leave you empty. You find yourself craving moments of quiet truth and sincerity with Him. God is teaching you that knowing about Him is not the same as knowing Him. In Scripture, those whom God drew closest often passed through this moment of holy dissatisfaction. They could no longer be sustained by tradition alone. God was calling them into a living, breathing relationship. The same is happening in you. This stage can feel confusing because it removes what was familiar without immediately replacing it. But God never creates hunger without intending to satisfy it. The discomfort you feel is not a sign of distance, it is proof of closeness forming. God is not stripping away your faith, He is refining it. He is drawing you past the surface so you can experience Him at the heart level. And once your faith moves from routine to relationship, everything about how you walk with Him begins to change. Number 2, silence becomes an invitation, not a distance. As God draws you closer to His heart, His silence begins to feel different. It no longer feels like absence or rejection. Instead, it carries a quiet weight, an invitation to remain, to listen, to stay present even without answers. You begin to realize that God's silence is not Him pulling away, it is Him drawing you in deeper. Earlier seasons may have been filled with clear direction, quick reassurance, or obvious confirmation, but now, God seems less verbal and more personal. He is not explaining as much. He is not rushing to resolve everything. And strangely, you are not panicking about it the way you once would have. Something in you understands that this quiet is intentional. In Scripture, God often grew closest to people in silence, not because He stopped caring, but because intimacy does not always need words. Silence removes performance. It strips away the need to impress, to prove, to ask repeatedly. It creates space where trust can grow without conditions. You may notice that in this quiet, your prayers change. You speak less and listen more. Sometimes you don't even know what to say, and yet you feel no urgency to fill the space. You simply remain with Him. That kind of stillness is not emptiness, it is closeness. This silence also reveals where your faith truly rests. When God does not explain Himself, do you stay or do you drift? When answers are delayed, do you trust His heart or demand His hand? God uses quiet seasons to build confidence, not in what He gives, but in who He is. What once felt like distance now feels sacred. You sense that God is near, even if He is not loud. His presence becomes something you recognize without needing constant reassurance. You learn that intimacy is not maintained by constant communication, but by consistent trust. If God feels quieter lately, do not assume He has stepped back. Often He becomes quieter because He is closer. He is teaching you to recognize Him not by sound, but by presence. And when silence begins to feel like an invitation rather than a void, it is a clear sign that God is drawing you closer to His heart. Number 3, your heart becomes more sensitive to sin and compromise. As God draws you closer to His heart, something subtle but powerful begins to happen inside you. Your sensitivity increases, not in a way that leads to fear or condemnation, but in a way that leads to honesty and alignment. Things you once brushed aside now weigh on your conscience. Attitudes you once excused now feel heavy. This is not because you are becoming more sinful, but because you are becoming more aware. Conviction deepens when intimacy grows. The closer you are to God, the clearer His holiness becomes. Not as a threat, but as a light. You don't feel pushed away by your flaws. You feel drawn to bring them into His presence. Sin no longer feels like a rule broken, but like a relationship disturbed. And that shift is a sign of closeness. You may notice that compromise feels uncomfortable even when no one else sees it. Not because you fear consequences, but because you value connection. Your heart desires to stay aligned with God's presence. You begin to care less about what you can get away with and more about what honors Him. This sensitivity is gentle, not harsh. God does not shame you into obedience when He is drawing you near. He invites you into transformation. His correction comes wrapped in patience and love. He exposes not to humiliate but to heal, and because you trust His heart more, you respond more willingly. You also become more aware of inner motives, not just outward actions. Pride, resentment, impatience, or selfish ambition surface more clearly. God is refining not just what you do, but why you do it. He is shaping your heart to reflect His character. If you find yourself more aware of what separates you from God's peace, do not interpret that as spiritual failure. It is spiritual closeness. A distant heart is numb. A close heart is responsive. Sensitivity is not weakness, it is evidence that your heart is alive in His presence. God draws you closer by making you more aware of what disrupts intimacy, and the fact that you care, that you want alignment more than convenience, is proof that your heart is moving closer to His. Number 4. You desire God's presence more than God's answers. As God draws you closer to His heart, a quiet shift takes place in your priorities. You still care about outcomes, you still bring your needs before Him, but something changes in how you approach Him. You begin to seek His presence more than His explanations. Being with Him starts to matter more than understanding everything He is doing. In earlier seasons, your prayers may have been filled with questions: when, why, how long? And those prayers were not wrong. But now, even when answers are delayed, your peace remains. You realize that clarity without closeness does not satisfy. You would rather sit in His presence without answers than receive answers without Him. This is a deep sign of intimacy. When God's presence becomes enough, your faith is no longer transactional. You are no longer approaching Him primarily for what He can do, but for who He is. Your prayers grow simpler, more honest. Sometimes they are nothing more than quiet moments of awareness, where words feel unnecessary. You begin to recognize that God's presence carries what answers cannot. It brings peace where logic fails. It brings strength where solutions are unclear. It brings assurance even when the path ahead is hidden. You start trusting that if God is near, you will be okay, regardless of what unfolds. This shift also changes how you wait. Waiting no longer feels empty. It becomes sacred. You learn to rest in God's nearness instead of rushing Him for results. You stop measuring His faithfulness by speed and start recognizing it by presence. In Scripture, those closest to God often valued His presence above all else. They learned that being near His heart was more powerful than having control over outcomes. That same transformation is happening in you. If you find yourself content to sit with God even when answers are missing, do not dismiss it. This is not passivity, it is trust. And it is one of the clearest signs that God is drawing you closer to His heart, where relationship outweighs resolution and love replaces urgency. Number 5. Earthly attachments begin to loosen their hold. As God draws you closer to His heart, you may notice that certain attachments quietly begin to loosen. Not through force, not through loss alone, but through a gradual shift in desire. Things that once held great emotional weight no longer grip you the same way. You still care, but you are no longer bound. You still appreciate, but you are no longer dependent. This can feel unsettling at first. You may wonder why certain ambitions don't drive you like they used to, or why approval, recognition, or control no longer feels as urgent. This is not apathy, it is freedom forming. God is not stripping joy from your life. He is removing what competes with intimacy. When God draws someone closer, He gently reorders their loves. He knows that divided affection weakens trust. So He begins to lift the weight of attachments that would pull your heart away from Him when life becomes difficult. You start realizing that what once felt essential was never meant to be ultimate. You may notice that disappointment doesn't devastate you the way it once did. Loss still hurts, but it no longer defines you. Success still matters, but it no longer validates you. God is teaching your heart where its true anchor belongs. And that anchor is not circumstances, people, or outcomes. It is Him. This loosening often happens quietly. There is no dramatic breaking point, just a steady realization that your peace no longer rises and falls with external things. You stop gripping so tightly. You trust more easily. You release control more willingly. These are not signs of weakness, they are signs of surrender. In Scripture, those closest to God learned to hold earthly things lightly, not because they were ungrateful, but because they were secure. They understood that intimacy with God provides a stability nothing else can offer. God is leading you in that same security. If you feel less attached to things that once defined you, do not panic. God is not emptying your life, He is making room. Room for deeper peace, room for clearer purpose, room for a closeness that cannot be shaken. And as earthly attachments loosen, you will find that your heart rests more fully, more freely, and more confidently near His. Number 6. You find yourself drawn to prayer without obligation. One of the clearest signs that God is quietly drawing you closer to His heart is a change in how you approach prayer. It no longer feels like a duty you must perform or a discipline you struggle to maintain. Instead, prayer becomes something you drift toward naturally, often without planning it. You find yourself turning to God not because you feel guilty if you don't, but because being with Him feels right. Prayer shifts from effort to desire. You are no longer counting minutes or worrying about saying the right words. Sometimes you come with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with nothing but awareness, and yet you feel connected. God is teaching you that prayer is not about structure, it is about relationship. This kind of prayer is deeply personal. You speak more honestly, you hide less. You stop editing your emotions before bringing them to God. There is less formality and more truth. You are not trying to impress Him, you are trusting Him. That trust is evidence of closeness. You may also notice that prayer spills into ordinary moments. It happens while you are working, walking, resting, or thinking. God is no longer confined to specific times or places. His presence feels accessible, familiar, near. This is what intimacy looks like, when communication becomes continuous, not scheduled. When prayer becomes desire instead of obligation, it is because love has replaced fear. You are no longer praying to avoid consequences or earn favor. You are praying because your heart recognizes where it belongs. God is gently drawing you into communion, not compliance. In Scripture, the people closest to God did not always pray the longest prayers, but they prayed the truest ones. God is shaping that same authenticity in you. He is teaching you that closeness does not require perfection, only openness. If you find yourself drawn to prayer in quiet, unplanned ways, do not dismiss it. This is not habit. It is hunger. It is the sound of your heart responding to God's invitation. And it is a beautiful sign that He is drawing you closer, not through obligation, but through love. Number 7. You experience peace that deepens even without change. One of the most profound signs that God is drawing you closer to His heart is a peace that deepens even when circumstances remain unresolved. Life may not be easier, answers may not be clearer, problems may not be solved, and yet, something within you settles. Anxiety loosens its grip, urgency fades. You are not detached from reality. You are anchored in God's presence. This peace does not come from control or understanding, it comes from trust. It is the kind of peace the Bible describes as guarding the heart, not because everything is safe, but because God is near. You are learning to rest without needing everything to make sense. You may notice that situations that once triggered fear no longer have the same power over you. You still feel emotion, but it no longer overwhelms you. You respond more gently. You wait more patiently. You react less impulsively. This peace is not passivity. It is confidence in God's faithfulness. This deepening peace is a sign that your heart is learning where it belongs. When you are close to God's heart, fear loses its authority. You begin to trust His character more than your circumstances. You no longer rush to fix everything because you believe He is already at work. God often gives peace before He changes anything around you. It is His way of saying, "Stay close, I am here." This peace keeps you from running ahead of Him or falling behind. It steadies you in the waiting. If you feel a quiet calm growing in your spirit, without logical reason, without visible change, do not ignore it. This peace is not accidental. It is a gift of intimacy. It is the fruit of closeness. When peace deepens in uncertainty, it is because your heart is resting near God's heart. And that rest is one of the clearest signs that He has been drawing you closer all along. Conclusion. When God quietly draws you closer to His heart, the change is rarely loud or dramatic. It unfolds gently, almost unnoticed at first, like a slow awakening of the soul. You don't wake up one day feeling suddenly perfect or spiritually complete. Instead, you realize that your heart has softened, your desires have shifted, and your faith has become more real, more honest, more alive. These signs were never meant to confuse you. They were meant to reassure you. The discomfort with surface-level faith, the silence that feels sacred, the sensitivity to compromise, the longing for presence over answers, the loosening of earthly attachments, the natural pull toward prayer, and the deepening peace. All of these are not signs that God is distant. They are evidence that He is near. God does not draw hearts closer by pressure or fear. He draws them by love. He invites rather than demands. He waits rather than forces. And when He draws someone close, it is because He desires relationship, not performance, closeness, not compliance. If you recognize these signs in your life, do not rush past them. Do not question them away. Let them lead you deeper. Let the quiet become sacred. Let the hunger guide you. Let the peace settle. You are not losing your way. You are finding God's heart. This season may feel different from what you expected faith to look like. It may feel quieter, slower, more personal. But this is often where the deepest transformation happens. God is not preparing you for a role. He is drawing you into relationship. And when your heart learns to rest near His, everything else begins to fall into its proper place. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you are no longer walking it alone. God is close, and He has been drawing you nearer all along.